Welcome back to ＳivilNet. I'm your host, Patrick Elliott. I'm delighted to be joined today by Henry Theriault, who's the assistant provost at Worcester State University and co-editor of Genocide Studies International. Professor, thank you.
Great to be here, Patrick. Thank you so much. And please call me Henry.
Yeah, I wish that we had some brighter topics to discuss, but unfortunately it does seem like we're entering a new age of genocides in the world, whether that's South Sudan, that's Tigray, that's the recent ethnic cleansing of Artsakh that has been qualified as a genocide by certain international scholars. So what does this mean for the world that we're entering?
I think we are in a very difficult time. We saw the turn to the right happening in Europe, in other places, in the US, over the past 10 years. And with that, unfortunately, has come an erosion, I think, of international law and sort of the politics of human rights. I hate to say Aliyev of Azerbaijan is right about something, but he was absolutely accurate when he was telling Armenians over the course of the blockade and so forth, you're appealing to international law. International law no longer matters its power. Unfortunately, that's the age we're in right now. International legal decisions are being, as we know, ignored, and it's certainly not just the case with Armenia, but across the globe. And we've just regressed into a place where military expenditures are up, military power is really determining things, and I think small countries like Armenia are really caught in the middle. It's not a Cold War now, there are multiple parties at odds with one another, and countries like Armenia, it's very, very hard to maneuver within a space that's hostile to you, and there are not clear, there are shifting alliances, changing things. I mean, ISIS now gets support from the US, these kinds of things. It's very cynical and difficult. And I really think over the next, and we see even in Gaza, over the next 5 to 10 years, unfortunately, I think with the political outlook we're seeing in North America and in other places, I think it's going to continue for a while. I'm hoping eventually people will start to rein this in and realize rule of law matters, human rights matter, but we will see. And Armenia has a tough 5 years ahead, I think, to make it through this period.
You did mention Gaza. I mean, this is one very interesting and I would say important precedent.
Yeah.
That there have been criminal cases filed against Netanyahu and members of his government for what they're doing in Gaza currently. But then you have Western human rights branded countries who are pretty much saying, yeah, we're going to ignore it. Despite, of course, giving Mongolia grief for refusing the arrest warrant of Putin.
Yeah, very selective.
Not realizing what that implies on an international scale. So what keeps you up at night when it comes to these situations?
I mean, I think the selectivity you've hit on, there's not a uniform approach to human rights globally. And of course, during the Cold War, the post-Cold War, big powers followed their interests, but there were points where there was a consensus that something that's happening here, something that's happening there, something we need to deal with. And right now, the interests and the power blocks are just so uninternational and unconcerned about with the overall global situation that we don't have those chances of, the US and Russia, for instance, are never going to agree on any kind of human rights issue where we might see, you mentioned, Sudan and the renewal of genocide against the Darfur people. We're not going to see, the UN Security Council come together on that. Not because maybe even, both countries don't agree, but they're never going to work together, at this point. So I think it's a really difficult situation. I'm optimistic. Years of dealing with genocide has sort of made me aware of the worst of human history and worst of human present. But I'm optimistic, that there are good people in governments who do understand where we need to go. And I hate to make a self-interest argument against genocide and other human rights abuses, trafficking, war crimes, these kinds of things. But ultimately, an unstable, violent world is bad for everybody. Arms companies might benefit, but overall societies don't. And I'm hoping at some point we'll get, at the cost of many lives, we'll get to a point where people will understand we have to change course. We cannot sustain a human race like this. It's really impossible. Armenia's, I would say, almost like a canary in the coal mine. Thinking about what's happening in Artsakh is a really important warning, I think, for the rest of the world.
I mean, it's kind of unconscionable in our day and age, in the age of social media, where everything is kind of showcased, where you had a country, the dictator that ethnically cleansed an entire region, and then the month later went to meet Olaf Scholz and shook his hand and did photo ops, which is, of course, Germany
hosted the COP29 as an environmental program. I mean, there's just so many things like this that we struggle with, that the contradictions are everywhere, and it's unfortunate.
But what does that say about the international mechanisms? I mean, we all thought after World War II, right? This whole never again, you know. I mean, we've also, as Armenians, after World War I, have been chanting never again, but apparently only after World War II it became
at least a saying,
But so does that mean we need to reconfigure the entire, these prevention mechanisms against genocide?
It's an excellent question, and I think it's fundamental for the future, and it's about genocide, but the implications go far broader. Like, if we can't handle genocide, if we can't stop that, how are we stopping economic exploitation, environmental destruction? We don't have a chance with those, given how bad genocide is, and we can't deal with that. I would say that up until the 1990s, the mechanisms were being developed, international law, genocide convention, and so forth, but they weren't very effective because they hadn't developed, there wasn't political will. The 1990s, we saw a moment post-Cold War where there were trials, there were efforts at prevention. Not great, selective. I point to the case of East Timor in 1999, where we actually did stop a genocide in a very simple way. US, Great Britain, and Australia stopped supplying the arms that they had been supplying to the perpetrator, and genocide was averted. There are methods that work. Unfortunately, I would say with the failure in Sudan in the 2000s and subsequent, cases, I think we've just lost that momentum, and now we've shifted back where the expectations people had that helped sustain some of the efforts they would make, the belief in the international political, legal, and ethical frameworks that we had developed, has eroded so much that the cynicism is really compromising the functioning of these mechanisms. I think the other thing is we're really discovering, and this is something I'm looking into in political theory, we're really discovering that great systems are not enough if you're not educating the global population, if you're not plugging people in who actually have a commitment to human rights. The best mechanisms in the world, the best laws, will not work. I think as a US citizen, seeing what's happening in the US, which is really very anti-democratic, through a democratic process, shows us that if you don't have good education, you don't have good social, ethical commitments, that even through a democratic process, you can erode the basic democratic values that underline it. And I think we've seen that. I really hope there will be a reversal of that people will just feel the need that we cannot keep going down this road.
As you probably already know, Armenia is currently negotiating a very tense peace treaty, which can very arguably be characterized as being done at the barrel of a gun. Part of that is supposedly one of the key pieces that we haven't agreed on, that the Aliyev regime in Baku is insisting upon, is that Armenia we mutually withdraw any kind of cases that we have at the ICC, ICJ, and the European Court for Human Rights. So what's your assessment on this? Should it actually transpire?
So there's two big questions you opened up, and really great questions. One is the more general question about the relationship that's existing in this negotiation process, and the other is specifically about the international law cases. And the bottom line is, it's in Azerbaijan's absolute interest to have a clause like that in any agreement, because they've tried cases, they've brought cases. They really have no chance, because at best, the best they could do with a case of war crimes or something is show that they did something not, only a little bit worse than Armenia. And the worst is that they did things that were just clear violations that Armenia did nothing correlating to. So in an international legal arena, they do not have strong cases. Armenia does have strong cases. I hate to say it, part of it is because the world loves Armenians when we're victimized. When we're fighting back, it's different, but I think now that Armenia is very clearly in a position of victimization and very much facing a much more powerful set of allies, that people understand what's going on. And Armenia has very, very strong cases. Luis Ocampo, I happen to be on the same panel with him at the global forum that the Foreign Ministry ran, and he is absolutely clear. Armenia needs to bring a case even with the accusation of genocide. He's called it. I was part of the group at the International Association of Genocide Scholars that drafted a resolution that was passed recognizing that there were genocidal components to what Azerbaijan has done in the blockade, in the expulsion of Armenians and so forth. And other people are seeing this, other experts. This is a case that has great potential, and it's really important. And I think if Armenia has a chance of quote unquote negotiating in this situation, it is precisely the pressure of international legal instruments that can balance to a degree the clearly imbalanced nature of the situation. I mean, Armenia, 3 million people, even if you factor in the diaspora, you know, how many people are active, the money, it's a drop in the bucket compared to 80 million Turks and 10 million Azeris with huge economic wealth, huge military power, supported by the US, supported by, now Azerbaijan is supported by Russia. The asymmetry is incredible. And when you add in the hostility that Turkey is the genocide perpetrator against Armenia that produced the demographic disparity that we see today, the resource disparity. We've never had reparations. We've never had an agreement from Turkey recognition. And now they have the same sort of attitudes towards Armenians. It's an impossible negotiating situation. What Armenia has are the international legal cases where international law is the one place where you can. It doesn't work out like this all the time. But you do have weaker, smaller groups have a lever that they can use that the world community has to respect because there's an interest in doing that. And I think the other thing is just with Turkey, I mean, when I see Aliyev, for instance, or Erdogan imposing preconditions on Armenia, we've got it backwards. Armenia should say, look, we'll negotiate, but we can only negotiate as a genocide victim, an ethnic cleansing victim with perpetrators. We're happy to negotiate. We want peace. We want prosperity for the region. We want democracy in both countries. We don't hate, I don't hate the people of Azerbaijan or Turkey in any way. But the precondition for positive negotiations is to recognize that these powers have victimized Armenians, and that's where we start to have an agreement. And you know, my one hope is if the current government could push that a little bit, the US, France, country after country, Germany, big players have recognized the Armenian genocide of 2015, and even in relation to Artsakh, have recognized that the military solution was not legitimate and have recognized abuses of Armenians. And I think that's where the world community can say, yeah, we see the problems and we're going to support Armenia to have a fair negotiation. We want peace, you know, all these kinds of things, but we're not going to just allow Turkey and Azerbaijan with their power to, as you said, at the point of the barrel of a gun, at economic threat and so forth. And I think there are a lot of ways forward. I think there are constituencies in Turkey that would welcome a better relationship. They're certainly there. They're not in power. Many of them are in jail. But I think there is an opportunity. And I think in Azerbaijan, even with the dissidents who are either forced out of Azerbaijan or sort of underground, there is the potential. I think in Armenia, there are people who want to have a good relations. And I think we can move forward. But it can't be this way. I agree with you. If the genocide is unacknowledged, if that power differential is unacknowledged, we've already lost.
Well, isn't there this kind of frightening historical precedent that it would set, that you have essentially a dictatorial regime that has beaten a democratic power into the ground, and then, you know, committed genocide and ethnic cleansing and horrible abuses, and is then finalizing it by saying, all right, well, you got to sign away any kind of repercussions. I mean, that opens the door for all kinds of evil throughout the world. This is not something that is going to be, you know, just in this region. It's a one-time thing. This is kind of a crazy. It's like you hit somebody with your car, and they're just almost dead, but they're paraplegic for your life, and you're like, all right, well, you're not allowed to sue me now. It's kind of.
You've stated it better than I could, I have to say. I think you're right on target. This kind of power differential and this attitude by those who are most responsible for violence. And I'll be honest, I'm on record. If Armenians have committed war crimes, you know, different things, we need to investigate. We need to be honest. We need to follow the international law. I absolutely agree with that. But clearly there's not anything comparable to what Azerbaijan has done. And you know, that you have a situation, I mean, let's face it, it's not just denying the past genocide. It's not just trying to consolidate what's happened in the past, But that barrel of a gun is not just a military situation. This is not, we will defeat you, as Germany did to France in the 1800s, something like that, or back and forth. It's not that. It is, we will eradicate you. So it's the threat of genocide today that you hear directly stated by leaders in both countries. And I think that that tells us two things. One is, if you negotiate with the idea that if you just appease them, that those attitudes will disappear, we know, and as a genocide scholar, we know absolutely it's the opposite. Unless countries go through a rehabilitative process where they are willing to admit what they did and guarantee, give some kind of guarantee, we will not renew this violence, that violence is going to go against the same victims again or new victims. And Turkey has never gone through that. And Azerbaijan really for decades now has organized a very anti-Armenian kind of identity. And there could be great things about Azerbaijan. There are. I'm very impressed with some of their peace activists. They're courageous more than I am. They're wonderful. They have potential within their society to uncover democratic elements and very positive elements, but that's not what's there now. And I think that if in this situation, you are dealing, we have the saying, Kabibi Tembe in the US, who used to do a lot of work on African-American reparations, had the let sleeping dogs lie analogy. And she said all the time, she would be told, even by African-Americans, don't push reparations, that's too much. We just want people to be less racist, these kinds of things. She said, if I can't talk about reparations to white America, given the devastation that slavery and Jim Crow and even contemporary discrimination have done, then what that tells me is the only way African Americans can find some kind of safety in the US, and not very good safety, is by leaving intact the racist structures, the gains through slavery. And it's the same thing Armenia is facing. The only way some people think we can have peace is if we completely accept the genocidal attitudes, the anti-Armenianism, and try to appease it. And my feeling is that could work for 5 years, but eventually those sleeping dogs will wake up. I mean, they did. The Ottoman Empire, into early Republic Turkey, a lot of the anti-Armenianism was behind the surface for a long time. Then you have people asserting 1965 forward, claims of genocide, legitimate claims. You have denial come, which betrays, Israel Charney just passed away as a famous genocide scholar. And he said, denial is a celebration of the past. It's not a denial of the past, that kind of thing. And it was a reemergence of genocidality. And now we're seeing actual Turkish troops killing Armenian people, civilians, for the first time in more than 100 years. And we can tell, that attitude is there. And so I think we have to be cold, hard realists. Maybe there is no solution for Armenia. I hate to say it. Genocide victims, there's often nothing that can be done, whatever path they take. Maybe we're in that situation. I don't believe so. Again, I'm optimistic. I think we've seen some progressive action in Turkey that has some potential for us. But we need to be very clear about what Turkish attitudes are, what Azeri attitudes are, and that we can't just wish them away. We have to confront them. We have allies in the global community who are willing to help us do that if we are willing to assert in appropriate ways. Sorry to go on so long, but yeah, you've opened a great area of discussion.
I like to end on a positive note. So,
of course,
just out of curiosity, is there anything that what makes you optimistic about the situation?
I will tell you, I've been in Armenia 3 times within the last maybe year and a half, and every time, whether I'm meeting with people in the education sector, the sort of civil society sector, media, I'm very encouraged by 2 things. One is I'm very encouraged that despite how difficult the situation is Armenia is in, people still want to have a good Armenia. They haven't given up that idea. And you look around, maybe there's a little bit of whistling in the dark, there's a little bit of denial about what's going on in Yerevan, but at the same time, people are trying to build. And I think anytime you have a society that's trying to build, it's trying to develop its institutions, it's trying to do new things, I think that's a really great sign. And the other thing is the young people here. I think we're finally at a point, I hope, and again, I'm an outsider, so I'm saying that as a diasporan, but I think we're finally at a point where that sort of post-Soviet hangover is shifting. And you have Armenians, first of all, you have a lot of diasporan Armenians who are younger who have moved back. And there's a new culture emerging with Hayastansi and diasporan Armenians and a new vision among young people. And you're seeing even CivilNet is a great example of this kind of new way of thinking about media for Armenia and doing some very innovative work. And that is the most important thing to me. I think that mentality and that future is so bright for Armenia. We just have to survive long enough. We have to support them. We need to give them the space to grow politically and intellectually and economically. And I think we've got a great future. It's just external players that want to take that away, and we just have to survive. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah.
As a young person, I'll include you in that. You're doing great work, and I appreciate it.
Professor Henry Theriault, thanks again for joining us today.
It's absolutely my honor. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks again for watching CivilNet.